The crimson and gold sky painted Clara Anderson's face as she sat perched on the weathered fence post at the edge of the Calico, California settlement. The weight of her decision to journey west alone still heavy upon her shoulders. She had arrived just 3 weeks prior in the late summer of 1885, fleeing the suffocating expectations of Boston society and the memory of a fiancé who had proven as faithful as a tumbleweed in a windstorm. The evening light cast long shadows across the dusty landscape, transforming the humble mining town into something almost magical. Clara drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the cooling desert air swept across her skin. She had come to cherish these quiet moments of solitude at day's end, when the bustling activity of the silver mining town gave way to a peaceful stillness. Her reverie was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, the distinct, measured gait of someone accustomed to riding horses. Clara turned slightly, enough to observe the tall figure approaching but not enough to appear welcoming. She had learned quickly that a woman alone in a frontier town needed to maintain a certain guardedness. "Mind if I watch with you?" The man's voice was low and gentle, carrying just a hint of a southern drawl. Clara studied him carefully. He stood several paces back, respecting her space, a courtesy not all men in these parts extended. His clothes marked him as a cowboy. Worn leather boots with spurs that caught the fading sunlight, denim pants, a simple button-down shirt beneath a vest, and a dust-covered Stetson that he now held in his hands. What struck her most, however, were his eyes, kind, patient, and surprisingly thoughtful. "I suppose the sunset belongs to everyone," Clara replied, neither invitation nor rejection in her tone. The cowboy nodded, maintaining his distance as he leaned against a nearby post. "Ethan Taylor," he offered simply. "I run cattle about 10 miles east." "Clara Anderson," she responded after a moment's hesitation. "I teach at the schoolhouse." Ethan's lips curved into a smile. "The new school teacher. I heard Calico finally managed to lure someone educated from back east. The children must be beside themselves having to mind their grammar now." Despite herself, Clara smiled. "Some more than others, though I must admit these children have taught me as much about survival out here as I've taught them about literature and arithmetic." They fell into a comfortable silence as the sun continued its descent, painting the sky in ever-deepening hues of purple and orange. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, stealing occasional glances at this quiet cowboy who seemed content to simply appreciate the spectacle of nature alongside her. "Been in Calico long?" Ethan finally asked, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. 3 weeks, Clara replied. "Though sometimes it feels like 3 years and other times like 3 days. Time moves differently here than it did in Boston." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "The desert has its own clock. Makes a day feel endless under the summer sun and then steals the hours away once evening falls." He paused. "What brought you all this way, if you don't mind my asking?" Clara considered deflecting the question but found herself answering honestly. "A desire for something genuine. Boston has many charms, but authenticity isn't among them. Too many masks, too many unwritten rules. And you found that authenticity in a mining town." There was amusement in his voice, but no mockery. "I'm still looking," she admitted. "But at least out here the dangers are honest. A rattlesnake doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving just a golden sliver above the jagged horizon. In the growing twilight, Clara could see the first stars emerging overhead. "Well, Miss Anderson," Ethan said, straightening and placing his hat back on his head, "I thank you for sharing your sunset with me. Perhaps our paths will cross again." Clara nodded, surprised to find herself hoping they would. "Good evening, Mr. Taylor." As the cowboy walked away, his silhouette growing indistinct in the gathering darkness, Clara remained on her perch a while longer. There was something about Ethan Taylor that intrigued her, a quietness that suggested depth rather than emptiness. In a town full of boisterous miners and rough-talking cowboys, his gentle demeanor stood out like a single clear note amidst chaos. When the night chill finally drove her toward town, Clara made her way back to the small room she rented above the general store. Calico had grown rapidly since the silver strike in 1881, but proper housing for a single woman remained scarce. Her accommodations were modest: a narrow bed, a small table that served as both dining area and desk, a washstand, and a chest for her limited belongings. But they offered privacy and a window that faced east, allowing her to greet each morning with the rising sun. As Clara prepared for bed, the image of the quiet cowboy lingered in her mind. There had been no awkward attempts at flirtation, no presumptuous questions, just a simple request to share a moment of beauty. Perhaps, she thought as she drifted toward sleep, there were more kinds of authenticity in this wild place than she had initially given it credit for. Morning arrived with the familiar sounds of Calico coming to life: the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels, the shouts of miners heading toward the hills. Clara dressed quickly in one of her 3 teaching dresses, a practical navy blue cotton with minimal embellishment. She had learned quickly that frontier fashion valued function over form, and the elaborate dresses she'd brought from Boston now hung largely unused in her small closet. The schoolhouse was a one-room building at the edge of town, hastily constructed when the population of children had grown too large to continue holding classes in the back of the church. Clara arrived early, as was her custom, to prepare the day's lessons and enjoy a few moments of quiet before her 16 students, ranging in age from 6 to 15, arrived with their boundless energy. She had just finished writing arithmetic problems on the blackboard when the door opened. Clara turned, expecting to see young Jimmy or perhaps the Wilkins sisters, who often arrived before the others. Instead, she found herself looking at Ethan Taylor. "Mr. Taylor," she said, unable to hide her surprise, "what brings you to the schoolhouse?" The cowboy removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss Anderson, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. The children won't arrive for another 20 minutes. Ethan nodded, his eyes taking in the modest classroom with its rows of mismatched desks and shelves of well-worn books. "I brought something for your school," he said, producing a package wrapped in brown paper from behind his back. "Heard you mention to Mrs. Patterson at the Mercantile that you were wanting more books." Clara approached, curiosity overtaking her initial surprise. She accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it to reveal 3 books, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, a primer on natural sciences, and a well-preserved copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. "Mr. Taylor, this is incredibly thoughtful," she said, running her fingers over the embossed cover of the Shakespeare volume. "The children will be thrilled, especially with Mr. Twain's work. How did you come by these?" Ethan shifted slightly, seeming almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "My father was an educated man, left me a fair collection when he passed. These have been sitting in a trunk, and books deserve to be read." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Besides, my cattle don't much appreciate Shakespeare." Clara laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even her. "Well, I can promise you these will find an appreciative audience here. Thank you." Ethan nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "There's one other matter. The reason I came to town today, actually." He cleared his throat. "The county's organizing a harvest festival in 2 weeks' time." Nothing fancy, just a gathering with food and music, some games for the young ones. I was wondering if you might consider attending. With me. The invitation caught Clara off guard. She had received several such proposals since arriving in Calico, mostly from miners and shopkeepers hoping to court the new schoolteacher. But she had declined them all, preferring her solitude to forced conversation. Yet Ethan's invitation stirred something different in her, a curiosity, perhaps, or simply the recognition of a kindred quiet spirit. "That would be lovely, Mr. Taylor," she heard herself say before she had fully decided. "Though I should warn you, I know very little about harvest festivals." Relief and pleasure crossed his face. Fortunately, they require no expertise, just a willingness to enjoy simple pleasures. He replaced his hat. "I'll call for you here at the schoolhouse that Saturday, if that's agreeable, around midday." "Yes, that would be fine." After Ethan left, Clara stood holding the books, wondering at the unexpected turn her morning had taken. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Ethan Taylor. No games, no pretense, just honest interest. It was precisely the quality she had come west hoping to find in people. The sound of children's voices approaching broke her reverie, and Clara quickly placed the books on her desk, knowing they would cause excitement among her students. As she greeted the children filing in, she found herself looking forward to Saturday with an anticipation she hadn't felt in quite some time. The following days passed with the rhythm that had become familiar to Clara since her arrival. Mornings at the schoolhouse, afternoons spent grading assignments or offering additional help to students who needed it. Evenings often spent reading or writing letters to the few friends in Boston with whom she still corresponded. Occasionally, she would join Mrs. Patterson, the mercantile owner's wife, for tea or attend Sunday services at the small church. Yet underlying this routine was a new current of anticipation. Twice more she encountered Ethan in town, once outside the post office, where they exchanged brief pleasantries, and again at the mercantile, where he insisted on carrying her purchases back to her lodgings. Each interaction revealed new facets of the man: his dry humor, his consideration, the respect he showed to everyone regardless of their station. When Saturday arrived, Clara found herself taking unusual care with her appearance. She chose her best dress, a forest green cotton with a modest bustle and ivory lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair, normally pulled back in a simple chignon for teaching, she arranged in a more becoming style, with soft curls framing her face. Ethan arrived promptly at midday, his own appearance notably spruced up. His usual work clothes had been replaced with clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that appeared almost new. His hair was neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. "Miss Anderson," he said, his eyes warming appreciatively. "You look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Taylor, you clean up rather well yourself." He offered his arm with a smile. "Shall we? I have the wagon just down the street." The Harvest Festival was being held on a large meadow about 3 miles outside of town, where several farming families had joined forces to create a communal space for the celebration. As they approached, Clara could see dozens of wagons already parked nearby and a large gathering of people from Calico and the surrounding areas. The festival grounds were festive indeed, tables laden with food, a cleared area for dancing where several men with fiddles and banjos were already playing, game stations for children, and everywhere the warm spirit of community that Clara had begun to appreciate about her new home. "It's wonderful," she said, taking in the scene with genuine pleasure. Ethan smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Folks out here don't have many chances to gather socially, makes these occasions special." He guided her toward the tables. "Would you like something to eat, Mrs. Hollister's apple pie is legendary in these parts. The afternoon passed in a pleasant blur. They ate at a table with several of Clara's students' families, who were clearly intrigued by the schoolteacher's companion but too polite to comment directly. Clara met farmers, ranchers, and their wives, people whose children were still too young for school or who lived too far out to attend. Ethan seemed to know everyone, greeting each person with genuine warmth. "How long have you been in this area?" Clara asked as they walked around the perimeter of the gathering. "About 5 years now," Ethan replied. "Came west after the war with not much more than a dream of open spaces. Worked as a hand on several ranches before saving enough to buy my own small spread. It's modest compared to some, but it's mine." "The war," Clara looked at him with new understanding. "You fought in the Civil War," Ethan nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "For the Union. I was young, enlisted in '64 when I was just 18, saw the last year of fighting." He paused. "Not something I talk about much," Clara nodded, understanding the reluctance she heard in his voice. "My father fought as well. He came home changed. Some wounds aren't visible." Ethan gave her a look of appreciation for her perception. "That's the truth of it." After a moment of reflective silence, he seemed to deliberately lighten the mood. "What about your family? Do they share your adventurous spirit coming all this way alone?" Clara smiled wryly. "Hardly. My mother was scandalized by my decision. My father, well, he passed 3 years ago. I think he might have understood, though. He always said I had more curiosity than was proper for a young lady." "Curiosity seems a fine quality to me," Ethan commented, "especially in someone shaping young minds." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the music changing tempo, becoming livelier as the designated dancing area filled with couples. "Would you care to dance, Miss Anderson?" Ethan asked, a hint of nervousness in his voice that Clara found endearing. "I would, Mr. Taylor, though I should warn you that Boston ballroom dances might differ from what I see happening there," she replied, nodding toward the energetic movements of the couples. Ethan offered his hand with a smile. "I reckon we'll manage just fine together," and they did. Despite some initial awkwardness as Clara adapted to the less formal style of dancing, they soon found their rhythm together. Ethan proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with gentle pressure from his hand at her waist. As the afternoon progressed into evening, Clara found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, caught up in the simple joy of movement and music. When the tempo finally slowed and the fiddlers struck up a waltz, Ethan drew her slightly closer, still entirely proper, but intimate enough that Clara could detect the clean scent of soap and the faint trace of leather that seemed to cling to him. They moved in harmony, and in that moment, Clara felt a connection to this quiet cowboy that transcended their brief acquaintance. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit around the perimeter of the festival grounds, creating pools of golden light. Families with young children began to depart, while others gathered around a large bonfire at the center of the clearing. "Would you like to join them, or would you prefer I take you back to town?" Ethan asked, clearly willing to accommodate her preference. "Let's stay a while longer," Clara decided. "It's a beautiful night." They found a place at the edge of the bonfire gathering where someone was telling a story about the early days of settlement in the area. Clara found herself leaning slightly against Ethan's shoulder as the night air cooled, and he responded by draping his jacket around her without disrupting the storyteller. Later, as they rode back to Calico under a canopy of stars, a comfortable silence settled between them. The wagon wheels creaked rhythmically, and the distant howl of a coyote reminded Clara of just how far she was from the city streets she had known all her life. "I had a wonderful time today, Mr. Taylor," she said as they approached the town. "Ethan," he corrected gently. After sharing Mrs. Hollister's pie and surviving those reels, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you? Clara smiled. Ethan, then. And you should call me Clara. Clara, he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. I certainly did. When they reached her lodgings, Ethan helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close in the moonlight, and Clara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. Good night, Clara. May I call on you again? I would like that very much. As Clara prepared for bed that night, she found herself replaying moments from the day, the way Ethan's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the secure feeling of his hand at her waist during their dances, the quiet attentiveness with which he listened when she spoke. It had been, she realized, the most enjoyable day she had experienced since arriving in Calico. Over the following weeks, Ethan became a regular presence in Clara's life. He would ride into town every few days, sometimes with practical reasons, supplies to purchase or business at the bank, and other times with no reason beyond seeing her. They established a routine of sorts: walks after school hours, occasional dinners at the town's only restaurant, and most frequently, shared sunsets at Clara's favorite spot on the edge of town. During these encounters, Clara learned the story of Ethan Taylor piece by piece. He had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a schoolteacher father and a mother who had passed when he was just 12. After the war, unable to settle back into the constraints of Eastern life, he had worked his way west, taking odd jobs on ranches and farms until he found himself in California. His dream of his own land had driven him through years of saving and learning, until finally purchasing his modest ranch east of Calico. In turn, Clara shared her own history: her childhood in Boston as the daughter of a merchant, her education that had been more extensive than was common for most young women thanks to her father's progressive views, the broken engagement that had precipitated her decision to answer Calico's advertisement for a teacher. She found herself telling Ethan things she had shared with no one else: her feelings of confinement in Boston society, her disappointment in discovering her fiancé's infidelity, her fear that she might never find a place where she truly belonged. I think belonging is something you build, not something you find, Ethan told her one evening as they watched the sunset. It's in the connections you make, the work that gives your days purpose. The wisdom in his words resonated with Clara. She had indeed begun to feel connected to Calico, to her students, to the shopkeepers who greeted her by name, to the rhythms of the small community. And increasingly, she felt connected to Ethan. His steady presence in her life had become something she looked forward to, his perspectives on life refreshing in their thoughtfulness and lack of pretension. They disagreed sometimes. Ethan had practical views shaped by frontier life that occasionally clashed with Clara's more idealistic outlook, but their disagreements were respectful, often leading to deeper understanding rather than discord. As October gave way to November, bringing cooler temperatures to the desert landscape, Clara found herself thinking more frequently about the future. Her contract with the town of Calico was for 1 year, renewable by mutual agreement. When she had arrived, she had not been certain she would stay beyond that initial commitment. Now, the thought of leaving filled her with a sense of loss that surprised her. One crisp Saturday in mid-November, Ethan arrived in town with an invitation that would mark a turning point in their relationship. "I'd like to show you my ranch," he said as they walked along Calico's main street. "It's not grand, but it's home. Perhaps this Sunday after church. We could make a day of it." The invitation carried weight beyond a simple visit, and they both knew it. For a single woman to visit a bachelor's home, even for a day, was a step that implied serious intentions. Clara considered for only a moment before answering. "I'd love to see your home." The next day, after the morning church service, Clara changed into her most practical dress, a brown cotton that wouldn't show dust, and met Ethan at his wagon. The ride to his ranch took just over an hour, during which Ethan pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land they passed. "There it is," he finally said as they crested a small rise. "The Circle T." Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained ranch. The main house was a simple wooden structure, not large but solid-looking, with a covered porch running along the front. Several outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, what appeared to be a smokehouse clustered nearby. In the distance, Clara could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures, and a small creek winding through the property glinted in the sunlight. "It's lovely," Clara said sincerely. There was an orderliness to the place that spoke of Ethan's character, unpretentious but carefully tended, practical yet not without beauty. As evidenced by the small garden she could see at one side of the house, where flowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. Ethan's pleasure at her approval was evident as he guided the wagon down the slope toward the house. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, a black and white border collie who circled the wagon excitedly. "That's Ranger," Ethan explained with a smile. "Best cattle dog in the territory, and thoroughly convinced he runs this ranch." They were also greeted by an older Mexican man who emerged from the bunkhouse as they pulled up to the main house. "Miguel Vasquez," Ethan introduced him. "My foreman and the man who's taught me most of what I know about ranching. Miguel, this is Miss Clara Anderson." The foreman tipped his hat respectfully. "A pleasure, señorita. The boss has spoken highly of you." Clara smiled, noting the genuine affection between the two men. "It's lovely to meet you, Mr. Vasquez. Miguel has been with the ranch since I purchased it," Ethan explained as he helped Clara down from the wagon. "He and his son Ramon handle things when I'm in town." Ethan gave her a tour of the property, showing her the barn with its 4 horses, the small vegetable garden that supplied much of the ranch's produce, the creek that provided water even in the driest months. Clara was impressed by the thought and care that had gone into every aspect of the ranch's operation. The house itself was simple but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace that served as both kitchen and living area, 2 small bedrooms, and a lean-to addition that housed Ethan's books, and a desk where he kept the ranch accounts. The furniture was largely handmade but solid, and there were touches that spoke of Ethan's character. Shelves lined with books, a chess set carved from wood, a quilt clearly made with skill and care draping a rocking chair by the fire. "My mother's," Ethan explained when he caught Clara admiring the quilt. "One of the few things I brought west with me, along with my father's books." Clara ran her hand over the careful stitching. "It's beautiful. She was talented." "She was," Ethan agreed, a softness in his voice. After a moment he added, "I've often thought this house lacks a woman's touch, but I've tried to make it comfortable." "You've succeeded," Clara assured him. "It feels like a home, not just a house." They shared a meal that Ethan prepared, a simple but delicious stew that had been simmering all morning, with fresh bread that Miguel's wife had sent over. As they ate at the wooden table by the window overlooking the creek, Clara could easily imagine a life in this peaceful place, so different from the crowded streets of Boston, yet somehow more satisfying. After the meal, they sat on the porch, watching the play of light on the distant hills as the afternoon progressed. Ranger lay at their feet, occasionally raising his head when a bird or rabbit caught his attention, but mostly content to rest in their company. "What do you think?" Ethan asked finally, his voice carrying a weight of meaning beyond the simple question. Of all this, I mean. Clara turned to look at him, recognizing the vulnerability beneath his calm exterior. I think you've built something remarkable here, Ethan, something to be proud of. He nodded, accepting her words but seeming to search for more. When I first came west, all I wanted was space, room to breathe after the war, after losing my parents. This land gave me that. But lately— He paused, choosing his words carefully. Lately, I've been thinking that space isn't enough on its own. Clara felt her heart quicken at the implication in his words. What else do you think you need? Ethan met her gaze directly. Someone to share it with. Someone who sees the beauty in simple things, who values honesty and hard work, who might grow to love this place as I do. He took a breath. I'm not a man of fancy words, Clara, but these past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. I find myself thinking of you when you're not here, wondering what you'd think of a sunset or a new calf or a passage in a book. He reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. I know it's soon. We've known each other barely 3 months, but I also know my own mind and my heart. I'm falling in love with you, Clara Anderson. I don't expect you to have an answer today about how you feel, but I wanted you to know. Clara looked at their joined hands, then back to Ethan's earnest face. The declaration didn't shock her. She had sensed the deepening of his feelings, mirroring her own growing attachment. What surprised her was the clarity with which she knew her response. I don't need more time, Ethan, she said softly. I came west looking for authenticity, for a place where I could be myself without pretense. I found that in Calico, but more importantly, I found it with you. You've never asked me to be anything other than who I am. She turned her hand to interlace her fingers with his. I'm falling in love with you too. It does seem fast when measured in days and weeks, but in shared conversations, in understanding, in the way I feel when I'm with you. It feels absolutely right. The smile that transformed Ethan's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. May I kiss you properly, Clara? In answer, she leaned forward, meeting him halfway. The kiss was tender at first, almost tentative, but deepened as they both gained confidence in the rightness of this step. When they finally parted, Clara felt a sense of homecoming unlike anything she had experienced before. They spent the remainder of the afternoon in the sweet haze of new love acknowledged, talking about their feelings, their hopes, occasionally stopping just to marvel at the turn their lives had taken since that first sunset shared on the fence post. As the day waned and it became time to return to town, Ethan helped Clara back into the wagon with a new gentleness, his hand lingering on hers longer than strictly necessary. The ride back to Calico was filled with conversation about practical matters, how often Ethan could visit town, when Clara might come to the ranch again, the approaching Christmas season, and what it might mean for their newly acknowledged relationship. At her lodgings, Ethan kissed her once more, this time with greater assurance. Good night, Clara. I'll see you on Wednesday. Good night, Ethan. Thank you for today, for everything. As Clara prepared for bed that night, her mind full of the day's revelations, she found herself writing in her journal with more hope than she had felt in years. The path ahead might not be simple, nothing worth having ever was, but for the first time since leaving Boston, she felt she might be finding not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. The weeks that followed were filled with the sweet unfolding of their relationship. Ethan began coming to town more frequently, often staying overnight at the small hotel, so he could spend evenings with Clara after her school duties were complete. They established rituals, Sunday dinners after church, Wednesday evening walks, letters exchanged when Ethan's ranch responsibilities kept him away for more than a few days. As December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and preparations for Christmas. Clara found herself increasingly integrated into the life of the community. Her students were progressing well. The townspeople had accepted her as one of their own, and her relationship with Ethan had given her a sense of future in this place that had once seemed so foreign. The school's Christmas pageant became the focus of Clara's professional energies, a production that the entire town looked forward to each year. Ethan helped by building simple sets and attending rehearsals when he could, his patience with the excited children endearing him further to Clara. On the evening of the pageant, with the entire community packed into the church to watch the children perform the nativity story, Clara stood at the back of the room, her heart full as she watched her students remember their lines and sing the carols she had taught them. Ethan stood beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers in the darkness, his presence a steady comfort. Later, as they walked through the crisp night air back to her lodgings, snowflakes began to fall, a rare occurrence in this part of California. "Look," Clara said with delight, holding out her hand to catch the delicate flakes. "It's like a Christmas card." Ethan smiled, watching her enjoyment with obvious pleasure. "A perfect night," he agreed, then surprised her by stopping beneath a street lamp. "And it seems like the right moment for this." Before Clara could ask what he meant, Ethan was reaching into his pocket, then lowering himself to one knee in the gathering snow. Her breath caught as she realized what was happening. "Clara Anderson," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and learning and laughter into my days in ways I never expected. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I'm certain of what I feel for you." He opened his hand to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a modest diamond flanked by two small sapphires. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife." "Clara, will you marry me?" Clara looked down at the man kneeling before her, this thoughtful, hard-working cowboy who had captured her heart with his quiet strength and gentle spirit, and knew with absolute certainty what her answer would be. "Yes, Ethan. Yes, I will marry you." His face illuminated with joy as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before drawing her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared sunsets. Around them, the snow continued to fall, transforming the dusty mining town into a wonderland that matched the magic Clara felt in her heart. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were enthusiastically positive. The schoolteacher and the respected rancher made a match that the townspeople heartily approved. Clara received hugs and congratulations from her students' mothers, and Ethan endured good-natured teasing from the men he encountered at the mercantile and saloon. They decided on a spring wedding, giving them time to prepare while avoiding both the winter's unpredictable weather and the intense heat of summer. Clara wrote to her mother and sister in Boston, sharing her news and extending invitations, though she was uncertain whether her mother would approve enough of her frontier marriage to make the journey west. As they entered the new year of 1886, Clara and Ethan began the practical preparations for their shared life. The house at the Circle T needed some modifications to better accommodate a woman's presence: a proper kitchen, some additional furnishings, curtains for the windows. Clara spent weekends at the ranch, working alongside Ethan to transform the bachelor's quarters into a family home. These shared projects revealed new dimensions to their relationship. Clara discovered Ethan's unexpected perfectionism when it came to woodworking, while he learned about her creative eye for making a space both practical and beautiful. They disagreed at times over the placement of the stove, the color of paint for the bedroom, but learned to compromise. their occasional tensions always resolving into deeper understanding. During one such weekend in late February, as they finished hanging curtains Clara had sewn for the main room windows, Ethan stepped back to admire their work. "What do you think? Beginning to look like a proper home?" Clara nodded, surveying the transformation they had accomplished over the past weeks. The main room now featured not just Ethan's practical furniture, but touches that reflected both their tastes: bookshelves built to Clara's specifications, a larger dining table that could accommodate guests, curtains that softened the strong western light. "It already feels like home to me," she said softly. Ethan drew her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. "3 more weeks," he murmured. "Then you'll never have to leave on Sunday evenings again." Their wedding was set for the 3rd Saturday in March, a date chosen to fall after the worst of winter weather, but before the spring roundup would demand Ethan's full attention at the ranch. Clara had ordered a dress from San Francisco, and the women of Calico had taken charge of planning the celebration, determined that their schoolteacher would have a proper wedding despite the frontier setting. As the date approached, Clara's excitement was tempered only by the letter she received from Boston. Her mother wrote that while she was relieved to hear of Clara's respectable engagement, her health would not permit travel to such a remote and uncivilized location. Her sister Lydia, however, had surprised her by announcing her intention to attend, wanting to see both her sister and this wild western territory that had so captivated Clara's heart. Lydia arrived a week before the wedding, her Eastern clothing and mannerisms immediately marking her as an outsider in Calico. Yet Clara was delighted to have family present for her important day, and Lydia proved more adaptable than expected, approaching the frontier town with curiosity rather than disdain. "I can see why you stayed," Lydia admitted as Clara showed her around Calico. "There's a freedom here that Boston doesn't offer women like us." She glanced at her sister with a hint of envy. "And your Ethan seems a good man, more substance than style, unlike most of the gentlemen we knew at home." Meeting Ethan had indeed solidified Lydia's approval. He had welcomed her with genuine warmth, answering her numerous questions about ranching with patience and taking her concerns about her sister's future seriously. "I promise you," he had told Lydia during her visit to the Circle T, "that while I can't offer Clara the luxuries of Boston, I can give her a good life filled with respect and partnership. She'll never be just a rancher's wife, she'll be my equal in all things." The declaration had clearly impressed Lydia, who later told Clara, "He sees you the real you in a way James never did." James had been Clara's former fiancé, and the comparison was apt. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with the desert beginning to show the first hints of spring wildflowers. The ceremony was held in Calico's small church, which had been transformed by the community's efforts. Wildflowers and ribbons adorned every pew, and sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the simple interior in golden light. Clara wore her San Francisco dress, ivory satin with delicate lace trim, more elaborate than her usual attire, but still suited to frontier life. Lydia had helped arrange her hair, weaving small white flowers into the upswept style. As she prepared in a side room of the church, Clara felt a profound sense of rightness, none of the anxiety she had experienced before her almost wedding in Boston, just peaceful certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Ethan, waiting at the altar in a new suit purchased for the occasion, looked momentarily stunned when Clara appeared at the back of the church. His face transformed with such undisguised love and admiration that several of the townswomen dabbed at their eyes before the ceremony had even begun. They spoke their vows clearly, the traditional words taking on new meaning in the context of their unique journey. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan's kiss was both tender and promising, a perfect balance of public propriety and private passion. The celebration afterward was held in the meadow where they had attended the harvest festival, now set with long tables laden with food contributed by every family in the community. There was music and dancing, speeches and toasts, children running with ribbons while their parents celebrated the union of two people who had become integral parts of their town. As evening approached and the party continued, Ethan led Clara away from the gathering to a quiet spot beneath a cottonwood tree. In the distance, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky with the same colors that had backdropped their first meeting. "Happy, Mrs. Taylor?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Clara leaned back against his chest, watching the sunset. "Completely, and you, Mr. Taylor, more than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I was thinking about that first evening, you sitting on the fence post, me gathering my courage to approach you, if you had sent me away." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "But I didn't. Some part of me recognized something in you even then." "Recognition," Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly it. Like finding something you didn't know you were looking for until that moment." They shared a kiss as the sun dipped below the horizon, sealing their wedding day with the same natural beauty that had witnessed the beginning of their story. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and they had bid farewell to the last of their well-wishers, Ethan drove Clara, now his wife, back to the Circle T. The ranch house was illuminated with lanterns Miguel had lit before discreetly retiring to the bunkhouse with his son, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night as husband and wife. Ethan lifted Clara from the wagon and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture, yet appreciating its symbolism. Inside, the house that they had prepared together over the past months welcomed them, no longer just Ethan's bachelor quarters but truly their home. Their first night together as husband and wife was a discovery of new intimacies, tender, occasionally awkward, ultimately profound in its connection. Clara found in Ethan a considerate lover whose patience matched his passion, while Ethan discovered in Clara a warmth and responsiveness that deepened his already profound love for her. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay together in the darkness of what was now their bedroom, Clara traced patterns on Ethan's chest, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the span of just 7 months. "I was watching that sunset alone, thinking about whether I had made a terrible mistake coming west," she murmured. "If you hadn't decided to join me that evening." Ethan caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I almost didn't. Thought you might prefer your solitude. But something told me to take the chance. I'm glad you listened to that something. As am I, my love. As am I." The transition from independent school teacher to married woman brought both joys and challenges for Clara. She continued teaching through the spring term, riding to and from town with Ethan when his work allowed it, or making the journey alone when necessary. The school board had initially expressed concern about her marital status, as married female teachers were uncommon, but the shortage of qualified educators in the area worked in Clara's favor. Life at the Circle T settled into new rhythms. Mornings began early with shared coffee on the porch when weather permitted, watching the sunrise paint the landscape in colors that never ceased to amaze Clara. Ethan would see to the ranch work, while Clara balanced her teaching duties with the management of their household, often with the help of Miguel's wife Rosalinda, who taught Clara the practical skills of frontier homemaking that had not been part of her Boston upbringing. Evenings were perhaps the sweetest time dinner together at their new table, conversation about their respective days, reading aloud from one of their shared books, and the growing physical intimacy that came with marriage. They discovered the pleasure of simply being together, whether working side by side on ranch projects or sitting in comfortable silence as the day's light faded. Spring brought the roundup, Ethan's busiest season. Clara witnessed firsthand the demanding nature of cattle ranching as Ethan and his small crew worked from dawn until well after dusk for weeks, bringing in the herd, branding calves, and preparing cattle for the drive to market. She found ways to support him rising before dawn to prepare substantial meals, riding out to bring food to the men when they worked far from the house, lending an extra hand when an unexpected storm threatened to scatter part of the herd. It was during this season that Clara truly began to understand the resilience required for life on a working ranch. The work was never ending, the weather unpredictable, the margin between profit and loss often razor thin. Yet she also saw the satisfaction Ethan derived from building something with his own hands, from working in partnership with the land rather than against it. As spring gave way to summer's heat, Clara's school term ended, giving her more time at the ranch. She began expanding the vegetable garden, experimenting with varieties that might withstand the desert climate, and started keeping chickens practical projects that contributed to their self-sufficiency, while giving her a sense of creation alongside Ethan's cattle work. It was in late June, as they celebrated their 3-month anniversary with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property, that Clara shared news that would once again transform their lives. "I have something to tell you," she said as they sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood, the remains of their meal packed away, Ethan's head resting in her lap as she ran her fingers through his hair. He opened his eyes, looking up at her with lazy contentment. "Hum." Clara took a deep breath, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her chest. "I believe we'll be welcoming a new member to the Circle T around Christmas time." It took a moment for her meaning to register, then Ethan sat up abruptly, his expression shifting from confusion to wonder. "A baby? You're certain?" Clara nodded. "As certain as I can be. Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Ethan's face transformed with such pure joy that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. He gathered her carefully into his arms as if she had suddenly become fragile, pressing fervent kisses to her hair, her forehead, finally her lips. "A baby," he repeated when they parted, his voice filled with awe. "Our child." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, his eyes meeting hers with an expression of such love and gratitude that words seemed unnecessary. They spent the remainder of the afternoon by the creek, talking about the future practical considerations about the house, whether Clara would continue teaching after the baby came, dreams about the kind of parents they hoped to be. As the sun began to lower in the sky, Ethan helped Clara to her feet with new attentiveness. "I'm not made of porcelain, you know," she teased as he insisted on carrying their picnic basket despite her protests. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Humor me," he replied with a smile that didn't quite hide his underlying concern. "At least until I get used to the idea that you're carrying our child." The months of Clara's pregnancy brought changes to the Circle T. Ethan, with Miguel's help, built an addition to the house, a nursery adjoining their bedroom with a window positioned to catch the morning light. Clara sewed curtains and quilts, preparing for the winter baby with the same careful attention she gave to all her projects. The community embraced the news of the coming child with enthusiasm. The women of Calico organized a baby shower, presenting Clara with handmade gowns, blankets, and practical advice about childbirth and infant care. Clara had decided not to return to teaching for the fall term, though the school board left the position open for her return the following year if she chose. As her body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Clara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. Just over a year ago, she had been a lonely newcomer in a strange town, uncertain of her place in the world. Now she was a wife, soon to be a mother, with roots growing deeper into this desert soil with each passing day. Ethan's protectiveness increased as Clara's pregnancy progressed, though he tried to balance his concern with respect for her independence. When she insisted on continuing to help with household chores and garden work, he compromised by ensuring she took rest periods during the day. When winter weather made travel difficult, he reluctantly agreed that Clara could remain at the ranch rather than moving to town to be closer to the doctor, but arranged for Rosalinda to stay in the house as her time approached. The baby arrived 3 days before Christmas, a healthy boy with Ethan's brown hair and Clara's blue eyes. The labor had been long but uncomplicated, with Rosalinda's experienced assistance proving invaluable until the doctor could arrive from town through a light snowfall. Ethan, who had paced outside the bedroom for hours, entered with trepidation when finally invited, his face pale with concern until he saw Clara propped up against the pillows, tired but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the quilts she had made. "Come meet your son," Clara said softly. The expression that crossed Ethan's face as he took the newborn in his arms, a mixture of terror and adoration, was one Clara knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, a finger gently tracing the baby's small features. "Absolutely perfect." They named him William Ethan Taylor after Ethan's father, though they quickly began calling him Will. The quiet Christmas they had planned became a celebration of new life, with Miguel and Rosalinda joining them for a simple but joyous dinner in the main room of the house. The cradle positioned near the fireplace, where all could admire the newest resident of the Circle T. The following spring brought new calves to the ranch and new routines to the household as Clara and Ethan adjusted to parenthood. Will proved to be a generally contented baby, though his tendency to be most awake during the pre-dawn hours tested both parents' endurance. Ethan would often take the baby for early morning walks around the ranch, allowing Clara some much-needed rest while introducing his son to the world that would be his inheritance. As Will grew from infant to toddler, the Circle T prospered as well. A particularly good market for beef allowed Ethan to purchase additional acreage adjoining their property, expanding their grazing land and securing water rights that would prove valuable in dry years. Clara, after much consideration, decided not to return to formal teaching, but instead began holding informal classes at the ranch for the children of nearby homesteaders who lived too far from town to attend the Calico school regularly. Their family expanded again when Will was 3, a daughter they named Elizabeth Lydia, after both their mothers. Beth, as she was called, had Clara's auburn hair and a determined personality that manifested from her earliest days. Will, already showing signs of his father's quiet thoughtfulness, approached his role as big brother with serious responsibility, proudly helping with the baby in ways that sometimes created more work for Clara, but always warmed her heart. Life on the ranch was never easy. Drought years threatened their cattle. Economic downturns affected beef prices, and the isolation of their location meant that medical concerns were always more complicated than they would have been in a city. Yet Clara and Ethan faced these challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. As the children grew, The Circle T became known throughout the region not just for its well-managed cattle operation, but for its hospitality. The Taylor home, continually expanded and improved over the years, became a gathering place for neighbors, a way station for travelers, and eventually a polling place for local elections. Clara's educational background and Ethan's practical knowledge complemented each other, allowing them to serve their growing community in ways neither could have accomplished alone. 10 years after that first sunset they had shared, Ethan and Clara stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play with the ranch dogs in the yard. Will, now 9, was showing his sister how to throw a ball for Ranger's successor, while Beth, at 6, was determined to master the skill despite her still small hands. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder as the western sky painted the landscape in familiar golds and reds. "That evening when you asked if you could join me," Ethan's arm tightened around her waist. "Not specifically, no. I just knew I wanted to know the woman who looked so peaceful watching the sunset." He pressed a kiss to her temple, now showing the first threads of silver among the auburn. "But I'm grateful every day that you let me stay." Clara smiled, watching as Will successfully taught Beth the proper throwing technique, both children laughing as the dog bounded after the ball. "So am I, Cowboy, so am I." They remained on the porch until the sun disappeared completely behind the distant mountains, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the desert sky. Inside, the lamps waited to be lit. Supper needed to be prepared. Children would soon need baths and bedtime stories. But for these few moments, Clara and Ethan stood together in the gathering darkness, watching the day end as their story had begun, sharing a sunset and the promise of all the sunrises yet to come. As the years passed, the Circle T continued to flourish under their care. Will grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's gift for working with cattle and his mother's love of learning. Beth developed into a spirited young woman whose determination served her well, as she challenged the expectations of what a rancher's daughter could accomplish. A third child joined their family when Will was 12 and Beth 9, a son they named Michael, whose arrival was unexpected but welcomed with the same joy that had greeted his siblings. The frontier changed around them as the century drew to a close. The silver mines of Calico began to play out in the 1890s, transforming the once bustling town into a quieter community. Railroads connected California more firmly to the east, bringing both opportunities and competition for ranchers like Ethan. New technologies, telephones, better farming equipment, eventually even automobiles gradually reached their corner of the West, adopted selectively based on their practical value to the ranch operations. Through it all, Clara and Ethan's partnership remained the foundation of their success. They disagreed at times, especially as the children grew older and questions of their futures arose. Ethan initially resisted when Will expressed interest in attending college in San Francisco, while Clara worried when Beth announced her intention to become a doctor, an ambitious goal for a young woman in the early 1900s. Yet they worked through these differences as they had all others, with respect for each other's perspectives and a shared commitment to their children's happiness. Their love, which had begun so unexpectedly with a shared sunset, deepened with each passing year. The passionate attraction of their early days matured into something even more precious, a profound understanding, a comfortable intimacy, a partnership that encompassed all aspects of their lives. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the community they had helped to build, their weathered faces showing the marks of years spent under the California sun, but their eyes still holding the same light when they looked at each other. In 1918, when the Spanish influenza swept through the country, their family was not spared. Clara, who had always been the one to nurse others through illness, fell ill herself after caring for several neighboring families. For terrifying weeks, Ethan rarely left her bedside, his face growing gaunt with worry as she battled the deadly disease. Will returned from his teaching position in San Francisco to help manage the ranch, while Beth put her medical training to use attending to her mother and others in the community. Clara's recovery was slow but steady, her natural resilience aided by the devoted care of her family. By spring, she was well enough to sit on the porch again, watching the desert bloom with its annual display of wildflowers. Ethan joined her each evening, their hands linked as they witnessed the setting sun paint the sky in the same colors that had backdropped their first meeting 33 years before. "I thought I might lose you," Ethan admitted one such evening, his voice rough with the emotion he still found difficult to express directly. Clara squeezed his hand, the gold of her wedding band catching the fading light. "I'm harder to get rid of than that, Cowboy." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles in a gesture that echoed their first declaration of love so many years ago. Thank God for that. As they entered their later years, Clara and Ethan gradually handed over the more demanding aspects of ranch management to Will, who had returned to the Circle T after several years of teaching, bringing with him a wife and eventually children of their own. Beth established a medical practice in the growing city of San Bernardino, but returned frequently to visit, often providing medical care to the area's still underserved population during her stays. Michael, who had inherited his mother's love of literature and his father's connection to the land, wrote stories about the West that began to gain recognition in national publications. The Circle T itself evolved with the times, adapting to changing markets and technologies while maintaining the core values Ethan and Clara had established. The original house, expanded multiple times over the decades, remained at the heart of the operation, though it was now surrounded by more modern buildings and equipment. The view from the porch, however, remained largely unchanged, the same sweep of desert and mountains that had captured Clara's heart during her first months in California. In the summer of 1930, as they approached their 70s, Clara and Ethan celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary with a picnic by the creek where they had once shared the news of Will's impending arrival. Though their steps were slower now, their hair completely silvered with age, the fundamental connection between them remained undiminished by time. They sat beneath the same cottonwood tree, now much larger than it had been during that long-ago picnic, sharing simple food and memories of the life they had built together. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked as they watched the play of light through the leaves above them. "About choosing this life?" "This place?" Clara considered the question seriously, as she did all questions from her husband. "Not about the important things," she finally answered. "There were times I missed certain aspects of city life, concerts, bookshops, the energy of many people in one place. But those were small sacrifices compared to what I gained." She smiled at him, the familiar lines of his face as dear to her as they had been in youth. "What about you? Any regrets about asking to join a strange woman watching the sunset?" Ethan's laugh, still warm despite the slight wheeze of age, wrapped around her like an embrace. "Only that I didn't do it sooner. Wasted a whole month seeing you around town before finding the courage." As the afternoon waned, they made their way back to the house, walking arm in arm at a pace that accommodated Ethan's arthritic knee and Clara's occasional shortness of breath. Their grandchildren, Will's sons and daughter, Beth's twin boys were expected for dinner, along with Michael and his wife, a gathering that would fill the house with the noise and energy that Clara and Ethan now enjoyed in measured doses. That evening, after the family had departed and the house settled into quiet, they sat on the porch as they had nearly every evening of their married life, watching the sun make its familiar journey toward the horizon. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, his arm around her waist in a position that had become second nature over the decades. "You remember what you said that first evening?" Clara asked softly. "When you asked to join me, mind if I watch with you?" Ethan quoted, his memory still sharp despite his advancing years. Simple words for what turned out to be the most important question of my life. Clara smiled, watching as the sun touched the distant mountains, beginning the spectacular display of color that never failed to move her. "I'm glad I said yes. As am I, my love. As am I." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, two figures silhouetted against the lamplight spilling from the house behind them. Their story, which had begun with a shared sunset, continued through the quiet rhythm of their evening ritual, a testament to the enduring power of a simple connection, nurtured through years of joy and sorrow, abundance and hardship, into a love as constant as the desert sky above them. And in that moment, as in countless moments before, they were simply Clara and Ethan, the schoolteacher, and the cowboy who had found in each other not just a companion for watching sunsets, but a partner for building a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone.